Joining us now is our friend and colleague, young William Diaz, who's just been ripping it up since the commission began, but before then, annoying MPs. Politicians on the streets of Ottawa, making it a very unsafe place for them to be, emotionally speaking. No violence, right? It's feelings and microaggressions. Depends on how you identify violence. Exactly. I hear it's hurt feelings these days.
Anything these days. Different.
It's hurt feelings these days. William, if you had to tell me what was the one shocking thing that you heard today out of Bill Blair's testimony. So Bill Blair, for those of you who don't know, he's the Minister of Emergency Preparedness. He is formerly the chief gun grabber in Canada, and he was the top cop in Toronto who oversaw the disaster of the G20. It was the G20 riots, actually. And I remember how ridiculous it was. They set up a free speech zone. If you need a zone for it, it's not free, by the way.
That's ridiculous.
And he kettled protesters. He trapped innocent people and bystanders in the rain. People were arbitrarily arrested. Sounds familiar. Anyway, he brought that same attitude to his new position in Justin Trudeau's government after he was elected in 2015.
And he's friends with Peter Slowly.
He's friends with Peter Slowly, the former chief of the Ottawa Police.
And Brenda Luckie, apparently. He said exclusively that they were friends.
They're friends, his friend Brenda. But Peter Slowly was his deputy. And so he's very empathetic to the treatment that Peter Slowly was receiving from his own deputies, which I was empathetic of until I had to listen to Peter Slowly. And then I was like, no, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure anymore. But I'll shut up. Tell me, what's the one big thing that you heard today out of Bill Blair's testimony?
I think it's hard to pinpoint one thing. I think the contradictions overall. So we've heard a lot of people since the beginning of the inquiry say that the Emergencies Act was not talked about until one day before it was invoked, until the 13th of February, basically. Then we heard some people say that it wasn't talked about until a week before it was invoked. Some people until 3 days it was invoked with the IRG meeting. And now he said during an interview that on the first day of the protest, that was a possible thing that could be used by the federal government. He said in an interview that it was thought about on the first day of the protest.
Right.
And then we learned today, I don't remember the exact day, but I think it's February 9th.
February 4th.
On the 4th.
The 4th. It was Bill Blair's strategy or Bill Blair's strategy. It was like on a readout of a ministerial meeting. And it was the 4th. And it was Bill Blair's strategy, I think it was, and it was Emergencies Act.
But I would say so. Yeah, I would say overall, in general, the contradictions that we heard from that incompetent man who's a Liberal minister, but also
he seemed
moving aside from the evidence, his body language and his attitude, the man was extremely stressed today during the inquiry. You saw his face turn red, especially when you're in person, you see it even better. His face was red. He kept drinking water. He would speak super fast. He was extremely, so you could see that his facial muscles were extremely tense on the stand. So it was very interesting to see him being that stressed because he's not usually that stressed. He's a long-time minister. Well, he's a minister and he was a chief of police, but before I think he was a chief of police. So he shouldn't be that stressed, yet he was today. And what tells me is that he probably had something to hide. When you're that stressed, you probably have something to hide.
But he couldn't get his story straight about when they were talking about invoking the Emergencies Act. He forgot that he told Global News in writing that it was a consideration from the very beginning. Then there's notes, and I think it was Justin Trudeau's chief of staff who was the one taking the notes, where it was February 4th. He wanted to drop the hammer then.
That's right, yeah.
The one thing that for me as an Albertan sort of piqued my interest was, and particularly because it's Bill Blair, but he was in this prickly dispute. We saw it in text messages with our Minister of Municipal Affairs, Rick McIver.
That's right.
Rick McIver did not want the Emergencies Act. He said, we need some heavy equipment to come. That's all we need. We can deal with this. We have existing laws. We just can't get tow trucks to come. We can't get the energy companies to come with their rig moving equipment. They looked at Saskatchewan, they looked in BC, they looked in Montana, they asked everybody, nobody was coming. Well, it's because they supported them. So they said, okay, great. Let's ask the Canadian Armed Forces. The base is just north of Edmonton. We know they have heavy equipment there.
100%.
From what I understand, somebody went there and laid eyes upon it. So they know it was there. He requested the heavy equipment to have access to it, because if it's federally owned, you just can't go commandeer it. And said, will you let us use it? And he said, oh, I gotta check. I gotta go up the chain and check. He never got back to Rick McIver. So the province, by the 11th and 12th, started buying their own stuff and got some good deals, by the way. They went on Auto Trader, they got on Kijiji. The Komatsu loader they bought was a hell of a deal, by the way. And they got $820,000 worth of this heavy haul equipment. As it turns out, they only needed it to move 3 pieces of equipment because before the Emergencies Act was invoked, it had all dispersed. They just decided.
Yeah, the Coast blockade had, they had taken themselves gone. Yeah.
And then we saw Bill Blair sending a message to Rick McIver after it's all said and done saying, basically, like, aren't you going to pat me on the back for invoking the Emergencies Act? Bill Blair called him a liar. And told him it would be better to keep your mouth shut, basically, and say nothing than to be lying because you did nothing.
Well, I think that's very interesting. The fact that Alberta was asking for resources and things, and Bill Blair saying, no, we don't have enough. We don't have, you're asking for too much. I think that's the second time, at least that we know of, that we hear a Liberal MP or even prime minister say that someone like veterans is asking for too much. Second time we hear that, and that Alberta was asking for too much, and despite asking for too much and not receiving what they were asking for, they were still able to handle the Coutts border blockade before the EA was invoked.
That's the important point, is Albertans were problem solvers. We don't rely on the feds for much. And this,
shocker.
This is a lesson learned, Jason Kenney's previous government, but it should be a lesson for Danielle Smith. Just don't ask the feds. Sort it out yourself. Because as it turns out, the decision to deny help to Alberta came from the Prime Minister's office. We saw that. Did the PMO sign off on this? Is what the email read. None of the approvals should have been going through the Prime Minister's office if we're asking the Minister of Emergency Preparedness for it. But also, Bill Blair was willing to use it against Alberta. They said, should we publish Alberta's ask for help? They said, should we publish it as a justification to invoke the Emergencies Act? Those greasy snakes.
It was really gross to watch that. And I felt my heart sink. I was like, no, you can't do that.
I do not tweeted those snakes.
That doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean you need to invoke it. But the reason why you guys were able to handle it, because you are the great province of Alberta. So I always say Alberta, the great province of Alberta. That's why you were able to handle Coutts, unlike the federal government, who is the disgusting Liberal government.
Well, they had really good communication and a really good standing relationship with the RCMP officers that were willing to work with them there, and they were. And we almost had one of the Rajan Sani, the previous transport minister, I believe, right? Yeah. She almost went down there to go and actually meet. That was, I think, the most. If there was a potential for anyone to have a meeting with the protesters, it would have been the province of Alberta, and it would have been that minister.
Grant Hunter went down there.
Who?
Grant Hunter. We had MLAs going down there to actually engage with the protesters.
And look what happened.
It resolved peacefully.
Wow, that's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, the cops were like shaking hands with the protesters at the end. And as always, the cops everywhere these protests were happening, outnumbered completely. If the truckers wanted to take over the whole city of Ottawa, don't take this the wrong way, but there are a lot of useless people in this town. They could have.
I don't disagree with you.
They could have walked right over them. They never did, not even once.
No, not even the people that threw eggs at them.
No, they didn't meet violence with violence, not even once.
I agree.
Let's go to Bill Blair, clip 6. This is also kind of a fun thing I found out today. Bill Blair scolded Justin Trudeau, it was kind of a half-assed scolding, but he did say, and the reason I know that it was about Justin Trudeau was the dates. So we saw in this, I think it's a readout of another phone call with the ministers. And one of the things Bill Blair advised was to, I forget, tone down the language, something to that effect, keep the language not.
I mean, that question I asked him today?
No, the question, you asked a question to that effect, but he said basically tone down the rhetoric about the convoy. It's not helpful. He said, avoid using inflammatory language. And that happened on the 28th of January.
That's very funny.
You know what happened on the 27th? Justin Trudeau called everybody fringe, radical.
Radical. They
fringe
have
minority.
potential for violence.
Yeah.
They're bad people. Yeah.
Fringe minority with unacceptable views is happened on the 27th, 28th. Bill Blair's like, not helpful.
What is going on?
Why don't we roll clip 6?
We need to keep the language down. And probably the people in the room knew what you were talking about, and you probably used more words than just that. So if you could flesh that out for us, what message you were trying to get across during that briefing when you said we need to keep the language down?
I believe we all have a responsibility to do what is necessary to keep the peace. And I was concerned that inflammatory language could incite a more violent response, potentially, or incite others to continue to come to the protest. And so I think one needs to maintain, and I've had some experience in this, in your language around an event to speak of it in such a way as to not aggravate it.
I have 3 points. Okay. So first of all, if they had listened to CSIS, that's what they said the whole time.
Right.
They said,
And
don't
the
do those
OPP.
things. Yes, it really, I mean, it was also, I'm not sure if we have that clip or if we'll talk about it, but it was also Rob Stewart, the deputy minister, that actually created that plan to go and meet with the protesters in Ottawa. That
His
was tabled.
deputy minister.
There you go. That was tabled. And we saw that in emails today. Why wasn't this, and how many other testimonies they considered it either incomplete or they just pretended like they didn't know about it. So that's one aspect of it. And then you have somebody that is constantly going against their own narrative as they're testifying, because it was like, we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that. And then it's like, well, as long as I feel like it was validated, then why not?
He spent the first hour of his testimony with the commission lawyers prattling on about how important it is to engage with protesters. He literally did. He said, in my time with the Toronto Police Service, right, I've dealt with the Tamils, I've dealt with the G20. I don't know why he brought up the G20 as a success, by the way, but he kept doing that. Dealt with all kinds of other protests. And he said, it's always important to engage with the protesters. But then when he was presented with the rules of engagement with the protesters that were drafted by his own ADM.
He said he didn't want to see any government official speak to them.
Yeah. But we also saw, again, when you're watching these guys testify, don't read the stuff they want you to see. Read the other
there's something
stuff.
under that. Yeah.
Read the other stuff, because you could see where it was Justin Trudeau's chief of staff, and she was taking her notes about people they were going to meet with. And the people that they were going to meet with was the vaxxed truckers. So they're discriminating against truckers based on vaccine status, but that's nothing new. And they were going to meet with the Shepherds of Good Hope, because they were saying, the convoyers came and stole our food, which is totally.
But that's in a different document. But even in that document, if it's possible, if we can just
it's on my Twitter account, you can see. If
we could go back to the same clip that we just were, and freeze on the first second of the clip where we're still able to see the document. If that's possible to do that, that would be great. But if you read a little bit lower on the exact same document, it is written that they are concerned, the Liberal Party is concerned about the office of the OLO.
So Efron, you'll see on that very first little part of the clip, if you go down, it's hard to see, is OLO going to meet with the protesters? So they were very concerned that the OLO, so that's the office of the leader of the opposition, which would have been Candice Bergen at the time, or maybe this was early enough that they hadn't thrown Aaron O'Toole to the curb, but it doesn't matter, because they were very concerned that the Conservatives were doing the reasonable thing and talking to their constituents.
And, speaking of micro expressions and breaking down his body language, you can also catch like the scratching of the neck, that's
the
nervousness.
twiddling of his thumbs. He doesn't
constantly
have any skin left on his thumbs. Every time he got a tough question, that was just like, it was like that from Bill Blair.
Excessive water drinking.
Oh yeah.
Shame.
No, but that
very
was,
shy.
That
It was written all over
interesting.
him.
That
Really.
was interesting to see that the Liberal Party was scared or concerned about having the opposition leader, the office of the opposition leader, meet with the protester? Why, if you're doing everything honestly, why would you be scared
Because it's
about
for
having your
optics.
opposition meeting with them?
It's optics.
Why would you be concerned about them meeting with sexist, racist, homophobic, fringe radicals if you actually don't think they are?
That's
those
right. That's
things?
another way to look at it as well, for sure.
Yeah.
No, definitely some interesting
They're
stuff.
scared that they would do the right thing, right?
Mhm.
Imagine what would happen if we had somebody from the opposition party actually come and meet with protesters. It's so funny to imagine all the hypotheticals, really, but this is where we're at. And it's absolutely such a circus every single day.
Because it would have shown that the opposition is actually willing to engage with the other side, which we know the liberals aren't able to do. They refuse to engage with the other side. That's a new liberal way of thinking.
Well, they won't talk to us.
I think that, they were concerned about the OLO meeting with them because they knew that it would completely upstage them. And I think that's when they really ramped up the rhetoric, is when the conservatives started meeting with them and they said, they only have one thing left to do, and it's to say, oh my God, can you believe they were meeting with those Nazis?
Yeah, can you believe that they're actually meeting with terrorists, that they're actually meeting with bad people?
Yeah, can you believe Candice Bergen met with those Nazis?
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. You know what? Maybe, Efron, let's shuffle out Will.
Yeah.
Let him put in his Uber Eats order because he's had a very long day and it's 9:30 here and
Order
young
me a
man has
steak.
still not eaten.
I'll leave you guys with the ladies. So today's the lady show. It's Selene and Sheila. You're here in Ottawa for 2 days, right?
Right. But I won't be on the stream tomorrow because I have to catch.
But according to Annalisa, though, according to one of her paid comments, I am a lady too, because she said that the ladies are doing a good job last time.
This is the SS show.
I guess it's always like I'm joking.
I don't make
Annalisa.
the rules. You can be whatever you want.
Yeah, nowadays you literally can't be. Don't even question my identity, Sheila.
I know.
Bigot.
I know. You get my bank
All right.
account frozen. Okay, let's run an ad so we can let William leave and then we'll bring on our friend Tom Razzo.